Welcome to the July 20 Joint Facilities Advisory Commission meeting. We are holding a hybrid public meeting which enables remote electronic participation as legally authorized by the Code of Virginia per JFAC's electronic meeting policy. There's a bullet point here that says we have some commissioners here that are in person, and then we have a JFAC member that is participating virtually, but we do not have a quorum, so the person that's virtual is only listening in at this point. At this time, I'd like to orient everyone to our hybrid environment and cover a few specifics about how tonight's meeting will be run. Members of the public may attend the meeting here in person or electronically by using Microsoft Teams link provided on the JFAC website. Additionally, there's a dial-in phone option for those that wish to use it. For commissioners who are joining virtually, if anyone loses internet connectivity during tonight's meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. Please keep your phones and devices muted until you are called upon. Turn off sound to other devices around you to minimize interference. For virtual attendees using Microsoft Teams, please turn off your video feed. I will address when it's appropriate to turn it on in a moment. The Microsoft Teams meeting chat should only be used for participants who need technical assistance or for members of the public to request to speak during the public comment period. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public comment periods. Additional notes for members of the public who would like to provide feedback and comment. We will hold public comment periods at the beginning and end of the meeting. Those requesting to speak may do so during only one comment period and will be allowed up to 3 minutes to speak on tonight's agenda item. When virtual attendees are called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located on your meeting command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. You'll be muted when your time has concluded. Lastly, this is a public forum. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to Freedom of Information Act requirements. Okay. So, have our agenda up. So I gave the welcome and the chair's update. I don't really have it. Well, I have a little bit of a chair's update. I spoke with our county board. I have met with our board liaisons within the last week and a half. There is still some discussion about what our work plan will be for the year, and apparently the recommended changes to our charter are still looked at and discussed. We have a new school board liaison, and that's Reed. And I don't have any idea what will happen once Reed rolls off the board. But he'll be our liaison until December. So, that's we won't. Libby, Garvey, and it did have David Pretty was our liaison for the last 2 years, or a year. But now we have Libby and Reed. So that's where we are. Public comment. Miranda, do you have any public comment?
No, thank you.
Okay. Okay. So, liaison update. We're going to get an update from Wells on his plan, Langston Boulevard Community Forum, but he is not here. So I guess we will put that off until next meeting or until he shows up. then I guess we can move. Anyway, Matt has the slides that he is going to project and begin our discussion of the pre-CIP report. And as I said in the as I said in the email, I wanted us to look through this, to look at this report through the eyes of JFAC. This is our mission. We may have other seats as members of the community, but I want to, make sure that we're kind of staying in our lane and providing, feedback that the boards, that will be helpful to both boards as a joint facilities advisory committee. So I posted our mission, which I think sort of helps put things into perspective. The overall mission of JFAC is to provide input to the boards on capital facilities needs assessment, capital improvement plans, and long-range facility planning for both the Arlington County government and Arlington Public Schools. So I put in here the timeline on the pre-CIP report, just to give us an idea about.
Could you optimize the screen, or I could sit closer?
I can optimize the screen, but that makes it so that I can't take notes. So I'll just have to rely on Robert to take notes.
All right, Robert. Okay, so I included this timeline because I think it will be helpful to kind of understand, the timeline of when we have to give feedback, and also where this information is ultimately leading to. So the pre-CIP report is replacing what is called the ASAP, which happens on the alternate year of CIPs. So last year we had a CIP. This year APS will adopt the CIP report, and that will, help guide. I see it as a report that helps define the needs of what will be needed to be addressed in a CIP, which is kind of a financial planning document. Sort of like here's what we need, and then we're going to put it into this financial planning document of how we can, based on what we can afford, and when we need it, kind of timeline wise. So from July, when the report was released, until basically until the end of September, they released the report and they're asking for the advisory commissions, APS, the APS's JFAC, Facilities Advisory Committee, and the JFAC to provide feedback to the school board and also members of the public. They're holding listening sessions and community table sessions. JFAC has been invited to participate in those. And so I'm not exactly sure what the role we would play in participating in, but we have been invited. And then in October, the school board, at a school board meeting, they will vote on the CIP direction, which that sort of directs staff on what to work on for the next 4 months as they lead into the CIP. And then there's school board meetings and work sessions and, different things they have to vote on along the way. But but by June, the 2024 CIP adopted. Is that right, Robert?
Yes, by next.
2024.
Next year.
Do the FY 2025. calendar year.
Yeah, no, there's 2025 on there.
Okay, so next slide. So the superintendent, in the pre-CIP report, the superintendent made several recommendations, and these are from the presentation to, for the school board to consider for the CIP direction. And the first one is to, and I'm just going to list them here and then we'll go into them in more detail in later slides. But the first one was to repurpose Nottingham for swing space effective school year 2026-27. Plan for future phases of the Arlington Career Center campus that aligns with the school board's 2023-32 CIP and maintains maximum student capacity of 2,570 seats. So that they want to keep that site. They made a promise in the last CIP that there would just be 2 programs on that site, and they wouldn't want another like elementary school to be put there, just sort of max out that site. So that's what that is. Confirmed to repurpose the existing ACC building for Montessori and deconstruct the old Henry building, replacing it with green space. Conducting a full middle school boundary process fall of 2023 and vote on program move and middle school boundaries in December 2023. So that's this fall and this December. And they are recommending that middle school Spanish immersion move to Kenmore and refine middle school boundaries all across the county.
Can you explain the Nottingham swing space?
Let's move.
I'll move on.
Yeah. So, for each of these recommendations, I sort of wanted us to ask the question, are the priorities identified within the report and the recommendations clear? And do they align with the data that's presented? As a, like based on sort of our mission and our countywide and long-range planning considerations taken into account. So the recommendation to repurpose Nottingham for swing space. Basically, what they are recommending is that there is excess capacity in the North Arlington elementary schools. So if we have a slide of that, we may need to go to the presentation. But they are recommending that they move that there's enough excess capacity in the surrounding schools that they can move the existing capacity out of Nottingham into other schools that they could mostly walk to. And then leaving that school empty, which could be swing space for the time that it is needed to be. So that more or less.
Yeah, and I don't know if we have the presentation to the given to the school board, that would be
Yeah, I do if you have a slide.
Slide 13. I think what you were trying to talk to the excess capacity.
Right.
Slide 13. Yes.
Yeah, so you can sort of hard to. Okay. Yeah. So in this North Arlington zone is sitting at kind of 85% capacity. And I mean, we're really looking at excess capacity. I have a slide of it later in the PowerPoint presentation. We're really looking at excess capacity all across the board. I mean, there is some zone 4 is an over 122 capacity, but there's just a couple of schools in that. And that, there is a recommendation that there also be elementary school boundary changes, but that is not until, what year is that, Robert?
I think. So.
26 or? Yeah, so fall of 26, implementing boundary changes for efficient capacity utilization among elementary schools. So they would repurpose a school in zone 1. The school that they're recommending is Nottingham. And then they, would do boundary changes in between zone 3 and zone 4, probably to balance that excess capacity.
Yeah, and in the report, there's two. The report has that everyone got a link to, has appendices, and some of the appendices are reports in and of themselves.
Right.
So there's one report that basically talks to the gathering of sites potentially for swing space, and my coworker Liana Gonzalez presented to JFAC and FAC, asking for like sites to be considered. And from that process, one of the appendices talks to the sort of like, rational way, trying to condense that list into something more manageable based on cost and a whole host of other considerations. And there's another appendix on how they got to Nottingham as a school among a couple of others that were candidates.
I think there was a helpful slide. I did watch the work session, and there was a helpful slide that gave numbers in terms of like eliminating a certain number. I think there were 61 sites evaluated, 46 didn't minimum criteria, and there was a cost associated with each of the other options. So some were building spaces, or other, and or maybe it was using an existing school as the swing space. So I thought that was very helpful information. I think the presentation in general, I found very helpful. A lot of the the graphs and visuals were very helpful.
Yeah.
That was like 26 if you want.
Yeah, and I think in terms of swing space, I was on I think it is really important to consider cost, because as we know, in the last CIP, there was a lot spent up front in the first couple of years on the new career center, and not a lot left over in the last 8 years. So what we have available for new information, for renovating an existing school and creating swing space, I think we have to be very mindful of cost. And I do have a couple of slides at the end of our PowerPoint that kind of speak to that. But I think that's a big picture thing that we as JFAC, need to keep in mind. I think also, actually, why don't we go ahead and go back to our, as you can see, like repurposing an elementary school is less than $5 million, and any of the other options are 25 to 70 million.
Naive questions. The swing space, there's an identified need for swing space, what is swing space?
So in swing space would be used for, so the context of that is that, for the last decade, really, since 2010, Arlington was growing at a rate, of 700 students a year, and we had to use all of our available bonding capacity to build every possible seat that we could, because we needed to find seats for students, because otherwise, we were putting, 22 classrooms of relocatables at Williamsburg, and we were not to create optimal learning environments for all of our schools. And so just recently, within the last 2 years since COVID, and just before that too, because of dropping birth rates, because of the information that Robert and our county colleague put together. I mean, really before COVID, we were seeing dropping birth rates, and we saw a big shift in kind of, 1 year there was 2,000 over, in the out years, we were looking at 2,000 additional elementary school seats. Something of that number. And then the next year, they revised the data, and because of lower birth rates and because fewer people were moving into Arlington, that dramatically changed. I don't remember the exact numbers right now. And then we had COVID hit, and that changed a lot too. So now we're in the situation. So the boards over the last 2 years, I think, really, they said, okay, we want to address some of our oldest schools that have not had these updates and have been waiting to have these updates for the last 10 years while we've had to address creating new seats. And so now we're in a situation where we have some breathing room. So let's go in and prioritize, which schools and which projects. Some of those projects they're imagining are going to need major renovations. And because during the last decade, they've had experience of didn't have swing space because we just didn't have it, like Abingdon and Ashland, and a couple of schools where the students were in the schools while they were doing renovations, and it made the project more expensive. It made it longer. It made it, it made it more difficult. And the longer it takes, the more it costs, and the more it costs, the longer it takes. And it didn't, it would have been better to potentially, so there is the idea that some of these schools may be better to just tear them down and do a rebuild, or it may need a major addition. But the idea is, let's move these students out during those things. Let's put ourselves in a position where we can move the students out as we can, and do these major renovations that these schools have been waiting for a long time. So last year, school board directed a needs assessment for all of the schools, and JFAC and FAC, really FAC did a lot of input on helping to provide criteria, and and we looked at it too, but it's the long range needs assessment renovation plan. Right, and that report is coming out in December, and that report will September, sorry. And that report will, give the school boards a sense of school A needs a new roof. These are our priority schools, and what they need. And that they looked at everything from, HVAC systems to roofs, and to, also common spaces, bathrooms and plumbing and electrical, kind of all of the nuts and bolts. But there isn't any, it's really looking at these buildings objectively as buildings, and not as, which is where the school board decision will come in. Like, okay, well, this they're gonna have to make a subjective decision based on, because I don't think any of our schools are in dire need of anything, but they're gonna have to sort of make a decision of this, let's do this one or that one because A, B, and C. And that might be tied into, there's more, free and reduced price lunches and second language learners in the school. So having a new school is really vital, to them, kind of, that kind of stuff is not looked at in the needs assessment, but that kind of information. So that information is not yet out. So we don't know which schools. You could probably take a stab and guess that it's going to be one of our older schools that, have been waiting, which would be Barcroft, Randolph, probably Barcroft, Randolph, that haven't had a major renovation and that are looking at, that are smaller schools. So.
Yeah, that's a great explanation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this, so in the report, it says that in September of 2023, the Facilities Department will present a prioritized school renovation list. So that's basically what you were asking. And so, one of the questions that and what you had as well was, without a list of proposed renovations, how can we assess the need for creating swing space? It's sort of, it's, once again, I'm asking, is the data that's presented, in this report supporting this need for swing space? And, in many cases, it's not a criticism. It's like, hey, come up with some data that helps support this. And, I haven't actually been to look at that appendix explaining why Nottingham, but I will kind of understand. I think one of the things when we had APS staff come here to talk to us about JFAC, about swing space, we were asked, I think we could say, what kind of considerations would you want APS to think about in terms of, surely one of them would be like enough space for all the students that would need to go in there, to satisfy that. What about proximity to, to me, one of a criteria that should be considered is proximity to the renovation project or projects, because especially if you're looking at kind of lower income communities, having their school be far in North Arlington, if their school, if they live in an area in South Arlington, how much of an impact is that going to be on this family? It is a consideration. I don't think it's only consideration, but I think it's a consideration. And I think without knowing that list of priority schools, I think it's hard for me as an individual, at least, to agree with that recommendation. And I don't disagree with it, but it's hard for me to sort of say, yep, that's the right one.
I thought that was helpful that we're going to get that report in September, because I was just mentioning to Robert, and I guess it's not really feasible to have our meetings at the schools, technology issues, but I did go to one FAC meeting at Barrett Elementary, and I thought there was significant room for there, shall we say. So, I don't have as much, we'll see it on paper, we'll have data, which is extremely helpful. And you're not getting sort of just a one-off here, or, one parent saying this or something that, but yeah, I thought it was very helpful. So I think it'll be really helpful to have something very concrete and documented in terms of all of the schools. But I don't know if there's a way for us to do any type of on-site visits, but just put that out there because like, what I did see, I was surprised at. So.
Right. I mean, that is an interesting, JFAC does have their meetings at all different schools. And so, you know, during my 6 years on there, I went to most of the schools. There is a difference, you know, I don't think that there is a, you know, like I said, I think all of our schools are in good working condition. You know, are there, you know, that are in constant state of repair, which is why we invest in NCMM and maintenance. And I think we have a very good, APS is a very good process of staying on top of their schools and, you know, maintaining good state of repair. But you know, this is an opportunity I think we have in this lower enrollment environment to really go in and make a substantial renovation or upgrade to some of these schools. And, you know, especially because we have newer schools and learning spaces and, you know, I think it's important, you know, to, you know, I really support prioritizing building in. We did see a draft of that range plan earlier this year, right?
I think what that was an example. So.
Okay.
So I believe at one of the FAC meetings, they showed it and I think at the joint meeting as well, but that was more of an example of some of the criteria they were considering.
Right.
So if anyone's curious as to what criteria could they possibly be looking at, it should be on the JFAC website for that joint meeting.
And these are actually some questions that Wells came up with. I guess the question of offer a preview of that report now, including its methods and findings. Robert just answered that. Are there renovations on the draft list that must be done by 2027? If not, then could APS take more time to consider where, when swing space is needed? Question, are there fiscal advantages to delaying renovations by a few years given the current limited bonding capacity? I mean, I think that's also a good question. I also think, you know, I would also sort of counter that by saying, you know, for the first time in a long time in a situation where we have excess capacity, we have the ability to kind of create, you know, move students into, you know, leave an existing school empty. Whichever one is the right one, I don't know. And, you know, use that as swing space. And then, you know, really do 1 or 2 or 3 schools that have been waiting for, you know, attention. You know, kind of they've been waiting patiently in line to get an upgrade that is deserved and needed. I mean, the counter argument to that too is like, okay, if we're looking at a tight budget, you know, here we are at APS. I mean, here we are in the county where we're looking at dropping commercial, or rising commercial vacancy rates and rising interest rates. You know, would we be better off putting off these renovations? You know, or doing some that just needs minor and, you know, or, you know, I mean, I don't know the right question, but I think it's important to kind of ask those questions. And I think that we are an advisory commission that should be asking those kinds of questions. So. Okay. Thank you. This is also one of Wells's questions. On page 8, the report projects that zone 4, which approximates the county's Richmond highway corridor, it's the one in south east, is expected to have building design seat needs for elementary students with about 280 more students and seats and a capacity utilization of around 122% by 2027-28. He asked, what is APS's plan for addressing this need for additional capacity seats in South Arlington? And I think the answer to that is that they're planning to do boundary changes. Right?
Yeah.
And actually, and then, yeah, I mean, I think boundary changes are the right thing, considering that there's under capacity in every other zone. I don't think building additional seats there is.
Yeah, in Virginia Highlands Park, they have a master plan, but on the latest county CIP, it's the time that will be looked at is way out in the future, and so it can be considered, but the time frame might not.
Right. I do support master planning for sites. I'm glad the county has that. For CIP, even if it is thinking about it 2030. I support that. I also just a personal comment on boundary changes in general. I think it's a good idea to do it countywide and to include all the schools, both at all levels, elementary school, middle school, and high school. I think it gives you more options. Even if some schools don't experience any change, some schools experience little changes, some experience more. I think doing it countywide is really, I really support doing it that way, especially after having sat on an advisory committee where you've done it differently. I think it's sort of tied your hands in ways that have limited options that or pit one community against another. And I don't, in ways that I just think you have the ability to make a better decision, better options when you have the whole county to work with to make changes. I think it also, because it cascades upon itself too. And so, sort of saying, I'm going to stop here, stop at the North Arlington line and, South Arlington line, or when you're balancing enrollment out of W&L a couple of years ago. I'm not sure if you were.
I was not here.
Yeah, you heard that happen. But you only could do the North and South boundaries. So it was just taking, it was a very limited number of planning units you had to work with. And get everybody unhappy. You had to do it because there were more excess, you just had to balance, couldn't have this the exact number, but you had to move students into the other schools. So you had to do it. But I think if you did it, I'll just say that I really support doing it, countywide at all levels. I think it's the right idea. I think it puts everybody in the same, everybody's in it. Everybody's invested.
Yeah.
And, if it's one thing that Arlingtonians don't like, it's somebody having something that they don't, and it also doesn't get like one community fired up and then everybody, it's just like, okay, we have to do boundary changes. I think it kind of becomes some more.
That would be good for the board to hear.
Okay, next slide, please. It's also one of Wells's questions. The report says that in 2022, APS estimated possible students from new housing scenarios from the Plan Langston Boulevard preliminary concept plan, and found that relevant existing school capacity could absorb the estimated students generated from the housing envisioned to Plan Langston Boulevard through 2030. How did APS's analysis of the enrollment impact of Plan Langston Boulevard show, or what did APS's analysis of the enrollment impact of Plan Langston Boulevard show? That analysis has been updated in light of the latest draft plan released in June. Also on page 5, the report identifies the Lee Community Center as sites identified to meet future community needs. Has APS analyzed how many elementary schools could be added to the Lee Center property? Could the Lee Center property be viable as swing space or for co-located uses between APS and county? Why would new construction take 3 to 5 years after the school year 2028 CIP?
Wells is talking about the Plan Langston Boulevard, when he's talking about those pages.
Well, I think the report, he's talking about the report. I'm pretty sure he's talking about the CIP report.
No, the Boulevard mentions Langston Community Center, but that's more for illustrative purposes. What could be done with different scenarios on so like what the site can accommodate. So
Yeah. Is this just a scroll up a little bit? This is just showing what other plans are APS is looking at
yeah,
as they kind of create the CIP direction.
yeah, and that one I can talk to my colleagues about how we characterize. I believe that when Langston Boulevard mentions the Langston Brown Community Center, is talking about it in terms of illustrative purposes, how the site might be able to fit different sort of facilities, different types of facilities, and how the site could function. But it's not recommending that a school be placed there. It also is partly owned by schools.
Okay.
So we might need to do some clarification.
Okay. So this is part of the section that says APS collaborates with? Yes. All right. Why don't we talk about this section? There is a slide on that, and we can just kind of go. Just skip down. Let's skip down to that and look at it. Go back to our.
Wait, this one?
Yeah. I thought this was, this section is right up JFAC's wheelhouse. So I wanted to just point us to that section and kind of ask for feedback. Is there anything missing in this section? Such as identifying joint use facilities that need future planning. Do we have any additional comments for their section? Are there recommendations to foster additional or improved collaborative planning?
Section.
The one that we were just looking at. And then in the report.
Okay. I'm doing great here.
Are doing great, Matt.
This section.
Right.
This is page 5. I guess
Page
this is page
4
4.
and
It starts on
5.
page 4. Starts with Career Center, PLPP, and PFRC, the collaboration that we do on enrollment projections and housing forecasts. And then these are all examples of
Right,
collaboration that we've done in enrollment projections.
right. Which I think are good examples. Could you go down a little bit? I mean, I think one thing, I think there are also some successful, like the Amazon building the Arlington Community High School is, I don't know if that's specifically collaboration with Arlington County, but I think that's an example of APS kind of operating outside. I mean, would that fall under collaboration with the county, or is that?
It's listed, it's right there.
Oh, it is. Where?
It's the community benefits Arlington
Okay.
Community High School.
Thank
together
you.
with home.
Okay. Very good. You guys did a great job putting that in. I mean, one of the things that I think this is, I appreciate this in there. I mean, do you guys have any feedback or go on?
I think that, it's probably merits a good discussion at perhaps our September meeting. I think that I know this is a bit out of school, but, when Libby was here, she talked about wanting idea generation. She's also talked about, she's said that she wants to look at strategic. So to some degree, we're reactive. This is all good stuff, and the meat and potatoes of getting the work done. The CIP and the pre-CIP kind of reactive, but I think that maybe there's a chance at some point for just talking a little bit more about the vision. What would be the kinds of joint facilities, programs that would make sense? We wanted to really think about how we're leveraging resources and putting program elements together. What would be the things that I'd say strategically we should be thinking? Whether it's, we've had a joint facility with theater programs over the years, that's successful. Is that something to keep working on? Are there other kinds of joint programs? Pre-K. Something crazy, but housing. And are there things to co-locate or put together with schools to create more, could community centers be integrated in some way? We have great successful programs. EJ is used as a rec center. What works? What would we want? What brings the community together? Leverages facilities. I mean, it's in a way hard to react, to some of the proposals Are we getting where we want to go? CIPs, or do we want to start taking the conversation at least? Some
Together a list of joint facilities as history. To me, but I don't know how much.
Yeah, I mean, I think the visioning part would be helpful. I think that there would especially be some county board members that would be open, kind of hearing that, kind of visioning on county joint uses. I mean, that's also in our wheelhouse and in our current mission and kind of out of the box thinking. I mean, it doesn't have to be really detailed. I think just sort of saying, including, some, a goal of that in this kind of collaborative planning might be helpful. One of the things that I would like to see, in a pre-CIP report that guides CIP direction is kind of a list of joint use projects that were identified in the last CIP to be, whether it's like field space expansion or field space conversion, field conversion or sometimes, when sometimes the county has done work on the community center at Gunston, like if there's work in the projects, I also know, I remember watching the county's staff presentation to the boards on their facilities CIP, and county manager, came to the question of the trade center, and he said, I know there's been some questions of the trade center here, but we're waiting for APS to kind of do their planning too, because they share that trade center site. Their facilities and operations is there. There's the bus depot, which was part of the CIP a few CIPs ago, renovation. There's bus parking, school bus parking, there's county bus parking. And I think, I don't need to see a plan, but I just think kind of like, okay, here's a list of the projects that we foresee needing joint use attention within the next CIP. And some of them may have been identified already in the last CIP in the out years. And some of them, may have, not been identified, but still need some planning. I mean, I do think that trade center planning, it's sort of off, it's been pushed off, but there's a lot that pivots around it.
Side
Right,
envisioning.
right.
I mean, this is again a little out of school, but it's against the inertia of the bureaucracy to want to do joint. So each department has enough trouble themselves getting support for whatever program they want to do, let alone saying, hey, let's work with that department and, work on this together. So I think that you have to push it, citizen side perhaps, or the board side, because the departments may not really be all that highly motivated to come up with their own creative proposal. And why would they? There's no reward. Complicated, it's harder to achieve. Yet from our citizen side, maybe we're looking for efficiencies. We're also looking knitting together the community. Okay, that these pieces come together where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So maybe that it's worth some just discussion, be things, ideas that don't go anywhere. But it wouldn't hurt to put that out there. Now, how does it fit into this process? I don't know.
Right.
But
I mean, I mean, that is just a sort of observation that I think, I'm not saying that we come up with things that we think they should joint plan, like, but things that have been identified already that just kind of, that both boards needed kind of like, sort of in a way, a little bit of a nudge, like, okay, all right, we both know we've got to think about this. Maybe it doesn't happen until 10 years, but it's on the list of things that we need to think about. And I think that would be sort of a helpful step. And it, may lead to future conversations. But, and I think it would fall somewhere in that category of APS collaborates with Arlington
Right.
County.
so, yeah, and along the lines of the statement, so saying when, I'm not sure, but I feel like it's worth exploring a little bit.
All right, do we want to move on to, or maybe we need to go back to, yeah,
Here. Career center.
yes. Okay, so this is also a recommendation in the report for the CIP direction. These are direct quotes from the presentation, or no. No, okay, sorry. They're not direct quotes. Those are my questions.
Okay.
Okay, so they, as we read, in the initial recommendation that was, to plan for future phases of the Arlington Career Center, and that was to build the building as voted for, which adds 269 net new high school seats to the building, and to move, and also in the CIP, they were recommending to move Montessori from Henry Building into and renovate the existing, the Legacy Career Center to be elementary school Montessori. So does the student enrollment data support the recommendation to move Montessori and increase the program's capacity by 237 seats? Go down one slide. So here's the projected elementary school capacity utilization chart. And that blue chart is, the blue line at the very top shows our school, how much, our actual school capacity. And the other bars are projections telling us how many students we're projecting. So at every year for the next 10 years, we're looking at close to 1,000, sometimes, almost 2,000 excess elementary school seats. This is also, kind of shows you, gives you a picture of, how we can potentially use an existing school for swing space. I think the data does support that we could do that. To me, I don't see justifying in a tight, you know, when we should, when these long-range renovation plan schools have been waiting for money, you know, have been waiting for an opportunity to have renovations done to their school. Why are we creating 237 more seats? And I mean that I have. If you go back.
Okay, this is an embarrassing question, but I may be behind the times on what's the status of the Career Center? What's going on that site?
So what was decided in the last CIP and the bond that passed was that they were going to build a new Career Center building, for Arlington Tech and the existing programs and the TE classes and the, create. And the decision of the board at the time was to build a bigger building, which added 369 additional high school seats. That decision left the Legacy Career Center, if they were using it to continue the programs in that school while they were building the new building. So Arlington Tech will remain in there, all the CTE classes,
Right,
all the, and then,
Right, the last I
right,
heard, the existing building of use, they
right.
were sort of
So the recommend,
keeping it,
right,
building a parking lot next to it.
right. So they're building a parking garage next to it. That's part of the plan. They're building the parking garage on where the horse pasture was,
Yeah.
kind of there, and they're tearing down part of the
Okay.
building. And the plan was to, in the last CIP, to move Montessori, and that's still the recommendation
That's
here,
the part I was
to
not aware of.
move Montessori, which is currently occupying the old Patrick Henry building on that site. They're gonna renovate it. In the last CIP, that cost was estimated to convert that legacy building, had 16 million in renovations over the last 10 years to upgrade to secondary seats. They were going to change, the last CIP estimated that cost at 15 million. New cost come in at 35 million.
Including the added seats, added 200.
Yeah, including adding 237.
So school board, every CIP, always from CIP to CIP, they can think of alternatives as well. But on slide 4 of the presentation, the work
Section.
yeah. So they explained that the superintendent is recommending thank you. Yeah, so facilities and operation will present the plan for future phases at an April 2024 school board. So some of this, it's still evolving. So, but the key is that it aligns with the school board's fiscal year 23-32 CIP. So as staff, we have to follow the direction provided in each of the prior CIP directions. So the CIP direction was to maintain maximum student capacity at 2,570 seats. And so at that meeting, one of the topics will be confirming the repurposing of the existing building for MPSA and deconstructing current MPSA. That's something to consider as well, you know, in terms of a lot of the content that's it's always, you know, it's noted following the CIP direction, this case the 2332 CIP direction. So that lays out a lot of the things that are contemplated in this report and in that presentation.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying that. I mean, I think that's why our, I hope that our feedback is kind of looking at data and consistencies and, maybe there's, like with that, like, does it make sense to build 200, in this environment like that? I think it's important to point, to kind of ask those questions and then whether the board, has an answer. Like, yes, it is justified because we made this promise to the community and this is where, we think it's the best decision. But I think it's, I want us to just kind of look at this very rationally and to provide, feedback that's valuable from a JFAC perspective, and kind of based on our mission of analyzing data and looking at it from a joint use and long-range planning, kind of the bigger picture. What's the, and also kind of taking into account, our, financial outlook and, the last CIP and kind of what we're looking at monetarily.
I'm missing that Steve is not able to talk. Laugh at all my.
So can we go back? So I also asked, one of the things, is there preliminary information for the long-range facilities renovation plan that prioritizes a new building for Montessori? Like, do we know that Henry building? I mean, I know it is a one-story building that takes up a lot of space on the site, but do we have data to support that it should get $35 million for renovation or any other school? I mean, that's the. Does the student enrollment data support the recommendation to continue with the plan to add 269 net new high schools? You please down two more slides. So this is the projected high school capacity utilization. Also, again, we're looking at over capacity. Close to 1,000 students at every.
Is that evenly distributed?
I would have to look at the presentation. I think Wakefield has more.
Yeah, there should.
Yes,
Sir.
I don't. This is a slide I copied from.
Okay.
Yeah, there is a lower.
Presentation. I don't remember, but they are doing high school boundary.
So high school, the only school that's over capacity by 2027 is Wakefield. That's
Right.
107.
Yeah, and it says over on the bubble, it says anticipate variation in capacity utilization rates across high schools. Wakefield is at 105, Yorktown is at 97, and WNL is at 89.
And there is presumably there's enough to the high so it just stays at 100% capacity.
Yeah. Yeah, they keep it at 100% or something. Yeah, so that, like, again, I just like, here's the data, we're looking at this know, looking at the seat surplus that we can, you know, if there is unbalance, we can, you know, do boundary changes or program, which we have done. APS, APS has done in the past. So is there data to support adding those 360 net new seats in? Anyway, okay, could you go back to the, to me, there isn't. I mean, I understand the argument made by, you know, the board and some of the staff in the last meeting that like, here's an opportunity, you know, there's sort of an opportunity cost thing, you know, you don't want to go and in 10 years when we're looking at additional capacity, you know, being at growth again. But right now, based on birth rates and move-in rates, you know, it's projecting a decline in the next 5 years. And high school seats in their high school is the most viable projection in a sense because you already have students moving through the system.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know, in the out years, like when you're for elementary school in the out years, you're like thinking about students that have not been born yet. You know, so you don't, things could radically change. There could be a baby boom post COVID that we don't know about yet. You know, like revenge travel, there's revenge children. I don't know. You know, I don't know. Like, but with high school, you know, there's already in the system, and we're looking. Projections are showing a market decline. And so does it make sense to spend that additional money in an environment where we're looking at, you know, rising commercial vacancy rates, acting increased responsibility to Metro spending, but Libby was explaining to me yesterday. And just, you know, new demands on our money now that COVID relief money is disappearing. And rising interest rates, which means that, you know, with a 10% debt service limit, you know, 10% goes less far. And rising construction costs. So, I mean, that's sort of a bigger picture thing. And then another question I had, you know, one of the things that, as long as I have been on a facilities advisory committee, whether it be the APS one or the joint facilities, there has always been this push and value of creating flexible spaces. You know, spaces that aren't for just a specific program or spaces that could easily be converted to something else or sort of forward thinking like, well, if enrollment goes down or continues to go down, could this space be converted into a community center, library, or a medical, you know, county medical facility? Kind of what are, you know, are we creating flexible spaces? That was really something that was a value that I think makes sense. And I think it's a value that was always sort of underscored in planning. And so I just question with the, you know, it is a question. Will the renovation plan for the Legacy Career Center for Montessori at the current estimated cost of $35 million be a flexible space? Or is this, you know, a very specific space being made for Montessori, which is an option program, which APS has a history of moving? which doesn't need to be. It's also kind of in the corner of the county that is growing with the Bristol City area. And, so does it make sense to really specify that building, dedicate that building for Montessori? That's a question. I also noticed just a detail that the estimated cost to convert Career Center for Montessori is 35 million, but when it was looked at for swing space in that slide that you brought up, it is at 25. So why the difference?
I mean, on those estimates, Robert, we have people doing sort of preliminary studies to.
I am not, to be frank, I am not familiar how those estimates were done. I know facilities and operations, whenever they're looking at possible facilities, they'll work with engineers and architects and get preliminary estimates. I believe maybe what some of my colleagues did was they might have looked at some of the past studies that were commissioned by facility operations for different type of facilities. And they might have gotten the cost from there, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, next slide. Yeah. Okay, so here's the middle school boundary process and program also recommended, also one of the recommendations in the report. It recommends moving Spanish immersion at Gunston, which is over capacity, to 10 more, and then doing county-wide boundary changes. Williamsburg is sitting at 65%. And the others are, again, I will reiterate my thoughts on, I think countywide boundary changes are the right way to go. Kind of looking at all of the boundaries, I think it gives you more options. I think moving Spanish immersion out of Gunston makes a lot of sense. In the far south part of the county, it's a little bit more centralized. Also, it's over capacity, so why not do a program move? It is sort of striking to me, though, that just the contrast of 10 years ago, Williamsburg was so over capacity, they had 22 relocatables, 22 classrooms relocatable, covering their parking lot. And now we're in a situation where they're at 65%.
Yeah, those.
And I mean, it shows you that we do go through ups and downs, which I think is another argument for flexible spaces. Anyway, have any?
What, so, way back in the day, there were schools that had, could opt into, like Jamestown, Taylor. There were groups of schools where you could actually select any school out of a group, and kids would. In one neighborhood, you weren't tied to a certain school. Is that completely gone now, that whole system?
So we still have our option schools. So like at middle school, HB Woodlawn, the school that's at 102%, that's an option school. So middle school students can enroll from all over.
That one I know. Yeah.
Right.
And then immersion at Gunston, well, the immersion program is county-wide. So students who go through the immersion program at Escuela Key, Claremont, and they transition to middle school, they choose to continue, they can go to Gunston. So that's an immersion program within the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
That
all
one
of
I
that
know.
changed when we started growing at the rate we were growing because you couldn't, like,
Couldn't do it.
couldn't move, you couldn't choose. Like when I first moved here in 2008, yeah, you can,
Right.
you could go, you
This,
could go here, you could go there.
To any neighborhood school, like not an option.
Yeah, like you could go to any option school, like you go, yeah, getting into science focus, no problem. Like it was, at least that was,
Right.
then when, someone
Yeah.
came to our preschool, that was right, my son started in 2010, which is the first year that we started really growing. And it, it didn't change overnight, but, very slowly, like that pod of schools that could transfer into science focus stopped because science focus got crazy overcrowded. And it was really kind of a neighborhood school that was also that pod school, and then, yeah, I mean, it really, all of that changed. And then,
Is it out of the question to reinstitute balance out? Is it just too much of a nightmare? Allow option.
Option schools, they remain, and students from anywhere in the county can apply to those option programs. There's a lottery system, so you're not guaranteed an entrance. You have to go parents.
I think
I'm thinking like the 98, what school is it? 90%, right?
Jefferson.
Jefferson. Like, I'm sorry, this is so stupid.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Question.
it's not a stupid question. I mean, I think.
Could they just say, hey, we'll just open up Williamsburg
So,
to teach
so
us?
so another document that's an appendix. So some of my colleagues in the office I work for, to December all the way to March, they publish a report. And for schools that are overcrowded, they sometimes they offer something called neighborhood transfers. So, for example, like Gunston, some of those students could, might be offered a neighborhood transfer to another school that is slightly under capacity. But again, the parents have to choose.
Right.
And we do that at the elementary level too, and at the high. And every year, it'll change a little bit based on what school is over capacity, what's under capacity, what level is it under capacity. So we published that called the enrollment management. So I believe the latest one included as an appendix, just to show the public, besides boundaries, these are some of the tools that we've used year to year to manage.
Are there numbers in there of how many people are transferring to
Um,
different districts?
I'm not sure, but that's something, I'm not sure.
There used to be a transfer. I mean, I think-
There still is a transfer.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that to consider with, offering more of that is that APS buses their students. And so if you did that, you're sort of also, to cost of, busing one kid from this neighborhood to a school far away. And, that is something to consider, I mean, it's especially when we were, really over capacity and kind of having to add like 10 school buses a year. And like, how do you manage it? How do you keep always a shortage of bus drivers, and they can't live in Arlington County, they can't afford it. So they come from out of where else in the state. And then anyway, it is, it's sort of one of those things in Arlington that the more you think about it, the more complicated it gets. We did a couple of years ago, Montgomery County, Maryland has a section of their county called the Down County Consortium, where they have several high schools and you can rank where you want to go, and you'll be able to go to any of the high school, and they have different programs and different specialties in each school, so you can kind of choose, or you could, you're automatically into one, and so a couple of people, the FAC county board members went up to talk to them about it, and the reason they did it was because they were facing having to do boundary changes, and they just didn't want to do them. So they say, let's just throw this lottery. And I mean, there were some positives to it in that they could balance diversity, they could balance free, they could by accepting the number of students, they could sort of self-balance, but the downsides were they really had to bust a whole bunch. I mean, they had hubs and you could pick up, but it was complicated.
Yeah.
John Chadwick, I am not busing all those students all around Arlington, but like there are options like that.
You
Like,
weigh that against the cost of building.
right, yeah, but when we, yeah, but
There are
when,
options of smaller.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, okay, do you guys have any other comments about this?
The only thing I'll add is that we have included an appendix. We do have draft middle school boundaries, so it is county-wide.
Okay,
And those are gonna be refined summer based on that.
okay,
But, so that is included in the report as well, it's very much draft boundary.
okay, so the middle school first.
Yes, and that's one of the things that the board will look at on October 12th, which is why that's a key date.
Okay, okay, thank you. Okay, we already looked at that.
Good.
Yeah. Okay, so on the pre-CIP report on page 8, it said that APS's proposal that that's in italics up top is a quote from page 8 in the pre-IC report. It says feedback on the superintendent's proposed FY 2023 CIP noted that APS's proposal lacked the level of detail included in the county's CIP proposal. APS includes details in the pre-IC report framework that will be updated and accompany the superintendent's proposed FY 25-34 CIP. I guess one question that I have that's not written down here. What are those details in the pre-CIP report framework? And where can we find them? And when will they be updated? And my guess is that feedback that they got came from us. And that they are addressing that there, which is appreciated. It's nice that it is acknowledged.
It's
And
for a different FY CIP.
for the upcoming CIP, the CIP that they will vote on this next June. So, yeah, so I just do wonder what are the details in this pre-IC report? that are responding to that? And where can we find them? And then I guess that's the question. And then, you know, I think this is also something that, you know, we can provide comment on, sort of given that JFAC is a joint committee for both this board and county board. It is part of our charge and mission to consider the alignment between the CIPs. Are there recommendations or considerations that we can make for the CIP direction that would better align the CIPs? Or for details that we would like to see included?
And, yeah. We make those.
By our September meeting.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, or, you know, I'm just sort of throwing that question out there, you know, be a, you know, a proactive recommendation, like, and your CIP directions align? You know, like, are there joint uses, you know, that have already been identified? I'm not saying that we should identify joint uses, but are there joint projects that have already been identified that should be, that are included in one, you know, one CIP direction, but maybe not included in another CIP direction? You know, are those, you know, I mean, I think broad strokes here is what I'm thinking about, not like very specific, like, details or asks.
My recollection of this from the last CIP process, and I think it was something that Claire brought up, was just that in the actual CIP reports that APS does, the county does, they're just, you know, they're formatted differently. And like it says in the top bullet here, there's a different level of detail. And so in the county CIP, if there's a project that's in the CIP paragraph or two, like it gets a page
Right.
that has maybe like a paragraph description of this is what this project is. And that was not necessarily in the last APS CIP or CIPs. Is it?
And that's my recollection.
Yeah.
And Claire, you know, saying that the county CIP has so much detail in her perspective. This AP school APS did. And so I think that's where we've included mini reports within this larger report to kind of add that detail and just try to explain as fully as possible the rationale for why this was considered, why that was considered. And you know, and even with boundaries, for example, like trying to give okay, here's an initial draft, and as opposed to doing this process later in the fall, we want to bring the community along very early to not surprise anyone and give people enough time to think and digest this information. So that's where that sort of that mention of detail comes from.
Right.
It's like, let's just add more information and more rationale for like all the decisions that are being recommended
Right.
to the school board.
You mean you're going to show your work? I like it. All for that. Yeah, I mean, I think sort of giving feedback on this, you know, will be, you know, I mean, I think, you know, from my perspective too, you know, one of the frustrations, or I just say, one of the observations that I had when I was looking at the CIPs, you know, pretty closely to give feedback for JFAC, was that, you know, when I first noticed that the county had, you know, because of COVID and because of not doing a 10-year CIP, they had just done some short-term CIPs before that. This is the rationale that the county manager gave, in the report that was given in the report, was that, they had a lot of backed up projects that they needed to kind of get into the CIP, just for general state of repair and for other, they weren't building a pool or a new community center because those were already done, but, I first noticed that they were really pushing that 10% debt service limit in the last 8 years, which made me kind of dive into it farther and think, okay, well, what are these? And every project was detailed and estimated and cost, and there were numbers put in there, and in an APS in every prior CIP that I had been a part of, there were always TBD projects, but there was always a cost estimated with it and a rationale for why we needed to do that TBD project. Like at an excess capacity, an excess need for elementary school seats. So we've got to just, put this in here, for kind of start thinking about where we're going to find these seats in year 9. And so there was always a number with them. And so I had a really hard time with the APS CIP that was not showing costs, because I see the CIP as a financial planning document, and you take the needs that are identified in this pre-CIP report, which I understand was done for the last one, which made it sort of tricky and a little bit less clear for everybody. And then you sort of fit them all in with timing and what's bonding available and sharing that bonding capacity with the county. And so, to just sort of say, we're going to do this project in these first 2 years, and then we just have all this money that will determine later, to me, is not long range planning. I mean, they eventually plugged in numbers in there, but you go down one. Sort of small. They eventually plugged in numbers before they adopted it. But as you see down after FY 2027, the total projects for the last 4 years, 5 years, is just 25 million. And that was a placeholder that was put in there by the county because they didn't get any information from APS. This is the county equivalent of what we just looked at, sort of, and so stand up. It's easier. So these numbers here, the top line, that was the county's numbers, and then you see there, those are APS's aligning. And you see here, this is the county's debt service ratio they're carrying for the last 5 years. So, I think, that's not a criticism of the county. They laid out very detailed explanations of what these projects are for, and they have to have these projects. And they are a need for the county. My advice to the boards would be, given that we're looking at rising interest rates, that we're looking at kind of, if APS wants to do a long range renovation, plan to a school and create swing space and continue with the projects that were determined in the lab at the Career Center site that were determined in the last CIP. What can the county begin planning to maybe not do in those out years to create more capacity, like, and I think that's where, the county and APS having aligned CIP directions and sort of general, very broad stroke, sort of here's the environment we're looking at. Here's the weather forecast
Yeah.
that we're looking at for the next 10 years. Can we plan, can we plan accordingly?
Incredibly hard. 'Cause The county, the numbers are all on the page, but it's, it's kind of a grab bag of projects.
Yeah.
And they, just having said on education for a number of years, projects just change randomly, seemingly random. Priorities, like something that wasn't a priority, so youth priority or something completely new appears, CIP, and it's immediately, so, what is the actual meaning of the numbers? I mean, in some ways, if APS doesn't have numbers to populate the spreadsheet, but it's almost more honest that, we're not claiming to have a degree of specificity. I don't know. It's for me, it's hard to look to take these CIPs and then tease out any kind of, we talked about this, I think. What's the decision-making process about how things are worded and prioritized and here in the CIP? So I think that's where I get lost, even before I get into some nuances you've identified. But I think the broad strokes could be useful, but at least for me, that's, the whole notion of not having in the county plan, Virginia Highlands Park, master plan funding. When there's, a community, perhaps need for a school, elementary school, or change in capacity there, there's a misalignment potentially in the CIP. I could be wrong on that, but those kinds of things,
Right,
to me, might be the logic path that about as deep as I can go.
I mean, to me, I could see APS looking at that based on the enrollment data, which elementary school, we're looking at like more than like almost 2,000 students out here. I mean, granted, that's based on like students that haven't been born yet when you're looking 10 years out. But I could see APS arguing to the county, let's push that back even farther. The planning for the Virginia Highlands site, because we don't see
Right.
needing that as a school within this 10-year CIP. And the thing that is also true about every CIP I've ever been a part of is that those out years change every time.
Right.
I mean, the out years needs change every time. The out years decisions change every time. The like the amount of money changes every time. I mean, almost every time I've been a part of it, there's more money, the next year. I don't know. I mean, I think it would be interesting to ask, given higher interest rates and given the commercial vacancy rates and given other sort of funding obligations that Arlington County is looking at, do we think this year will be another year where we'll see more money available? Or is it gonna be less. Or maybe about the same. But I think, sort of the only thing that we can base decisions on really is the information that we have at hand. And like weather forecast or Greg really used to talk about like hurricane paths, you sort of see, the farther you go out, the wider,
Right.
the wider the path is, and it could take a turn to the right, it could take a turn to the left. You don't really know, but if you're falling within that wide path, like, you got to sort of get prepared a little bit. And
I mean, one thing just, takeaway I've got from tonight is, it is really difficult to predict the future, of course. And, we had over capacity, needed more capacity, and now we have excess capacity, but it's unbalanced. I mean, I think in terms of our mission, joint facilities, maybe there's a way of, we need to think about, how we look at these facilities and how they fit into integrated planning. So like you just said, can we have more flexibility in the spaces such that portion of a building can be repurposed for another use. We start to build our facilities, like for instance, Career Center, could have been a great place where we created more urban type of uses on that site. Perhaps some retail space, or housing, or elements that could have been flexibly adapted, busing it up for more students and rationing down and backfilling with leasable space. We've been looking for private sector, but maybe that's more of a lesson, is that county urbanizes, try to make facilities that are more flexible, that opportunity for swings. We have no idea what's going to happen. Induce. It's really hard to predict.
yeah,
So
and it always
maybe
has,
there needs to be money in the CIP to do some strategic and planning and integrate. Start to use our schools as community nuclei, that are multi-purpose community centers, singular purpose-built, brittle facilities that become obsolete because we have no other use for the building. Money for that.
Check, it's 8:58.
Yeah.
okay. Do we want to see if Miranda has any? Miranda, do you have any public comment?
No, I don't. Thank you.
All right, then. I think there was one more. Yes, other thoughts or comments? Yeah. I mean, I think, the legacy, one of the things about the legacy Career Center, just to sort of end it, is that like I could see it being leased to Nova, or use the kitchen that's been used for culinary arts, for kind of creating a space that could be rented out for events and other community, and that the students could come, or it could be like other community cooking classes, or I think that they're for the county, sort of adult cooking classes, get master chefs to come and teach a class. I don't know. It's sort of just thinking out of the if for some reason a decision is made not converted to I just sort of think, just thinking, of what ideas or thoughts for what it
The
could
problem
be.
is we just have no way of, approaching those kinds of ideas, because for schools to take that on, that's just a budget drain. spend resources and not fulfill their mission. You know, so the inertia is stacked against any kind of joint use.
Almost administer it, yeah, like get rules across the board. Yeah.
Really have to build it into the culture, have some sort of way administering it, you know, and maybe it's something we should push. Certainly, it's environmentally more sustainable to be able to backfill space with multiple uses, and it also creates a lot of opportunity. I mean, the things you just mentioned are awesome sounding, you know, but we
And to
don't
create
have any.
income,
You're
no,
right.
for the
It's-
schools. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I think maybe JFAC thinking about these kinds of, because also part of our mission is sort of out of the box thinking, like, and I think, and also, thinking of the future, what happens with, if we continue to see, fine, can we think of creative, are there, maybe this is not something that we put in, this report, but maybe just ask the question, but, what, are there alternative uses for existing schools that could come into play? I mean, one also last point, sort of close up the meeting, is that one of the ideas that have been brought up to me by a school board member and Libby was for JFAC to potentially do an after action from COVID for our facilities. Like, how were they used during that pandemic? And is there a way that we could use them better in the future or other kind of future emergencies? And, anyway, just throwing that out there, it's just an idea at this point. It's not anything.
Has it changed usage? So
Right.
years later, it was being used this way, how is it being used? And like, how is it being used now? And do we think that'll continue?
Right. And if we could, do it again.
Seriously, we never have to go through that
Let's
again.
not go through that again,
So-
but like if something else happened or, a flood or, like, are there other, are there ways that we can be prepared with our facilities to easily convert them into places where people sleep for several nights or, I don't know. I mean, it's a thought, and I think it was just tied to how we. And I think it also is sort of fits into our lane of long range visioning, and it's the alternative side of the coin is how do we grow? Like if enrollment suddenly changes, like where does the next school go? Where, are we limiting ourselves with making decisions now by not building those, is that the right thing to do? Because, 10 years from now, we may be looking at enrollment growth, just as severe, just as steep as we were 10 years ago. Like that stark contrasting slide of Williamsburg being at 65%, will we see that?
Yeah.
So were boundaries reached on or what?
They converted the old
Yeah,
HB
so-
building into Dorothy Ham, and they moved HB down to the Heights. And then, so that created a middle school.
Okay.
Swanson was also, Williamsburg and Swanson both had about 20 classrooms on their site. And hallways, not enough lockers, students.
Good things for the slides. Good.
Thank you, Matt. Right.
So the thought is that by September, we're action-oriented recommendations set.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think this is sort of a preliminary ground run, and I think we will probably do probably something similar if you have any thoughts or how to, and then we'll maybe from this discussion, I'll come with some sample recommendations or thoughts that we can kind of approve, and hopefully then we'll actually say yes to that recommendation or change that recommendation. Because we will have to have a turnaround time. Draft recommendations that we then edit and approve or send or read out. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you, Matt and Robert, for
Yep.
answering all the questions
Yeah.
and for taking notes. And thank you, Miranda and Steve, for joining. Even though you couldn't talk.
I hope I'm allowed to say goodnight.
Thanks, Steve.
Good night.
See you, Steve.
Bye bye. Take care, all.
Bye.